What happens when a talk show host tries to humiliate a Hollywood legend only to end up humbled himself? No shouting, no walkouts, just one quiet moment that stopped the entire room and shook the internet. Jeff Bridges didn't fight back with anger. He answered with stillness. And what happened next changed late-night television forever. If you believe dignity still matters, and that grace can silence the loudest room, hit subscribe, so you never miss stories like this. Drop a comment. Stillness speaks. If this moment moved you, and share this video, because sometimes what the world needs most is to hear the quiet truth. It was supposed to be a warm return, one of those feel-good late-night segments where a beloved actor chats about life, laughs at a few harmless memories, and plugs a personal project. Jeff Bridges, now 74, walked onto the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live to polite applause. Dressed casually in a navy blazer and jeans, he looked every bit the Hollywood legend, who'd seen it all but never lost his soul. The show billed it as a special segment featuring a national treasure talking about his new book, The Weight of Stillness, a reflection on healing mindfulness and surviving cancer. Jimmy greeted him with his signature grin, offering a handshake and a seat. Jeff Bridges, ladies and gentlemen, the dude himself. The crowd responded with cheers, some standing to clap. On the surface, everything looked like a typical late-night reunion. But something felt off. The smile Jimmy wore looked tight, the tone of his voice just slightly forced. Older viewers watching from home, especially those who'd followed Jeff's career for decades, might have sensed it. This wasn't just an interview. There was an edge hiding under the surface. Bridges didn't seem to notice, at least not right away. He thanked Jimmy graciously, smiled at the crowd, and began speaking gently about the inspiration behind the book. Stillness, he said, isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of awareness. The studio was quiet. Even the house band, known for throwing in snappy riffs, stayed silent. Then came the pivot. Jimmy leaned forward, tapping the stack of blue cards in front of him with a smirk. "Now, Jeff," he said, drawing out the moment like a magician about to reveal a trick. "We actually prepared something special for you tonight, too." The studio lights dimmed slightly. The screen behind them flickered on. Bridges glanced up. The title card read in bold white letters, "Jeff's Deepest Thoughts, or Deepest Flops." The audience chuckled uncertainly. What followed wasn't a tribute. It was a rapid-fire montage of clips, moments pulled from Jeff's least critically acclaimed roles. Awkward interviews from the early 2000s, a forgotten talk show flub, a questionable Irish accent in Blown Away, and a long pause from an old awards show where Jeff clearly blanked on a co-star's name. Each segment was followed by a loud, cartoonish sound effect. One clip even had a pop-up bubble saying, "What was he thinking?" Some in the audience laughed out of habit, but others grew quiet, uncomfortable. The energy had shifted. This wasn't playful. It felt targeted. Jimmy, still smiling, looked over. "Pretty intense, huh? That's quite a reel." Bridges said nothing. He stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. No smile. No wince, just stillness. To anyone watching from home, especially older Americans, who knew the rhythm of old-school dignity, this moment hit differently. It wasn't just that Jimmy was poking fun. It was how he did it under the pretense of celebration, with a turn that felt rehearsed, mean-spirited, and oddly timed for a man promoting a book about peace. Bridges didn't fire back. He didn't laugh either. He folded his hands gently in his lap, nodded once, and waited. The camera caught it all. The silence, the tension, the shifting glances in the crowd. Kimmel's setup wasn't landing like he'd hoped. It wasn't edgy. It was awkward. Backstage producers were signaling one another. A few audience members could be seen glancing toward the exits. And Jeff Bridges. He sat calmly. The kind of calm that isn't empty but deliberate. No one could have predicted what would happen next. But those who remembered how Bridges handled storms in the past on and off screen knew something was coming, and it wasn't going to be a punchline. It was going to be a reckoning. The screen behind them finally faded to black, but the awkwardness hung thick in the studio air. Jeff Bridges didn't flinch. He simply looked at Jimmy Kimmel, the way a teacher might look at a student who hadn't realized he'd just made a serious mistake. And yet Jimmy pushed forward, doubling down on the segment's tone, except now he wasn't hiding the smirk. "So Jeff," he said, adjusting in his chair, "you really believe sitting in silence can fix the world?" The words hung for a beat too long. Then, with mock sincerity, Jimmy added, "That's cute." A few audience members chuckled reflexively, trained by years of late-night cadence. But it didn't feel right, especially not after what they'd just seen. Especially not with the man they were watching across from Kimmel, an actor known not just for his roles, but for the rare grace he carried off screen. Jeff turned slightly in his seat, just enough to face Kimmel more directly. Well, he began gently, but he never got to finish. Jimmy cut him off with another jab. "I mean, did silence help you pick that awful role in R.I.P.D. too?" Laughter followed this time, louder, encouraged by the crew. But it was nervous laughter, tense, edged with guilt. Jeff Bridges didn't shift. He didn't blink. He waited. Again, he tried to respond. "You know, sometimes a project," Kimmel interrupted once more. "No, seriously, 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. My cousin's garage band has a higher rating than that." More laughter, but now the discomfort was visible. A woman in the second row glanced sideways at her husband. One young man folded his arms. A couple of gray-haired guests in the front weren't smiling at all. Jeff sat still, not frozen, but present. The kind of stillness that wasn't silence out of fear, but stillness out of patience. Like a seasoned pilot letting a storm burn itself out before speaking to the tower. And yet Kimmel kept flying into it. "So, tell me," he said, tilting his head with mock innocence, "are you here to sell peace? Or just sell books, that was it?" The moment everything shifted, Jeff leaned forward ever so slightly, elbows resting on his knees. Voice calm, but edged with something deeper. He didn't take the bait. He didn't swing back. He just looked at Jimmy Kimmel, like he'd finally seen past the joke, past the lights, past the studio clock counting down commercial breaks. "Is that what you think this is?" Jeff asked, his voice low, unwavering. A pitch. The air in the studio chilled. Jimmy blinked. A flicker of confusion danced across his face. It wasn't the response he expected, and that's when the dynamic quietly changed. Jeff sat back, breathing once, deep and slow. The camera zoomed in slightly, the silence growing louder than any laugh line could. "I came here because I was invited," Viv continued gently. "Because we've had real conversations before. But this..." He paused, then glanced toward the camera. "This isn't a conversation. This is a performance. But only one of us is acting." The audience didn't laugh, not even nervously. Kimmel fidgeted. The cue cards on his desk suddenly looked useless. His grin. Smaller now. Jeff folded his hands and waited. Not in anger. Not in protest. Just in presence. It was only the second act of the show. But the game had changed. And for the first time, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't holding the stage. He was holding a mirror. And it was starting to reflect something he didn't expect to see. For a few seconds, Jeff Bridges said absolutely nothing. And somehow that silence said more than any speech could have mustered. He didn't flinch, didn't clear his throat, didn't reach for a clever comeback. He just breathed. Deep. Centered. The kind of breath someone takes not to calm down but to stand firm. The kind of pause that doesn't signal hesitation, but choice. Jimmy Kimmel, for the first time that evening, looked unsure. His smile had faded into something closer to a wince. The production crew didn't cue music. No camera cut away. They stayed trained on Jeff's face, calm, still solid. And then came the line that shifted the earth beneath the entire room. "Do you want me to be real?" Jeff said slowly, looking Jimmy directly in the eyes. "Or do you want me to be a clip?" The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience froze. Not a single cough, not a shuffle, not even a breath. Jimmy blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but he said nothing. That was rare. The man who always had the punchline suddenly had no line at all. Jeff leaned back, but not in retreat. He was still fully there, just no longer playing in Jimmy's arena. "I've been in this industry 50 years. Jeff continued, his voice calm, but charged with a quiet force. "I've played heroes, addicts, drifters, and men falling apart. I've delivered lines written to make people cheer, or cry, or laugh. But this is different. You could feel the shift. The room wasn't a studio anymore. It had become something closer to a court or a chapel. And Jeff wasn't performing. He was testifying. See what we're doing right now, Jimmy? It's not comedy. It's not dialogue. It's extraction. The studio lights, usually designed to brighten the energy, now seemed to spotlight a kind of confrontation no one had expected. You're not asking me questions. You're clipping me into sound bites. You're not looking to understand, you're looking to trend. Every word was delivered without anger. There was no bitterness in his voice, no theatrical pause, just steady, deliberate truth. Like a man who had nothing to prove but everything to protect. And in that moment, he wasn't protecting himself, he was protecting the very idea of real conversation. Jimmy looked down, visibly rattled, his trademark smirk gone. The laughter sign flickered above the crowd, but no one laughed. No one moved. Jeff continued, his eyes scanning the audience. Not just the host. What you're doing here tonight, it's not new. It's the same trap we've all fallen into. Get the moment. Get the views. Cut someone down and call it entertainment. He paused, not for effect, but as if giving space for the truth to land where it needed to. But the problem is, we start believing that's all we are. Clips. Flops. Numbers. Mistakes. He looked back to Jimmy, softer now. And that's dangerous, man. Because the more we clip people down, the less room we give them to grow. You could have heard a pin drop in the studio. Some in the audience were visibly moved. One older gentleman in the front wiped his glasses slowly. A woman in the back pressed her hand over her mouth. Bridges didn't need volume to dominate the space. He didn't need music graphics applause or viral gimmicks. He simply brought truth wrapped in stillness, and that was more powerful than any roast. Jimmy Kimmel, who had invited him there to laugh, now sat silent, small, almost childlike. He looked like someone who had just remembered what decency felt like. And it wasn't over. Jeff sat up straighter. Not aggressive, but present. Fully. "I'm not upset, Jimmy. I'm just awake." He smiled faintly. Not smug, not triumphant, just human. "So if you want me to be real, I'm still here." He folded his hands once more and let the silence return. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. The storm wasn't loud. It was quiet. And it had just begun. The stillness didn't fade. It deepened. Jeff Bridges sat quietly absorbing the silence he himself had created. He wasn't performing anymore. He was holding the room with presence. The tension had been broken not by outrage, not by drama, but by a man simply choosing not to play along. And now it was his turn to lead. Slowly, with no rush, Jeff reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. The motion alone turned every eye toward him. Even the cameras, as if sensing something sacred, zoomed gently closer. He unfolded a small, weathered piece of paper, creased yellowing at the corners, handled with care over the years. Then he looked up at Jimmy. "I wasn't planning to read this," Jeff said quietly. "But maybe this is the moment." He held up the letter with one hand, his voice steady but unmistakably full. "A 16-year-old boy wrote this to me after watching The Fisher King. It didn't win big at the box office. Some critics dismissed it. But this letter, it stayed with me longer than any trophy ever could." A hush fell even deeper over the studio. The audience leaned in, not physically, but emotionally. Even Kimmel, usually master of the moment, now sat like a man in a pew. He wrote, "Watching you play that character gave me back my father. I was angry at him. I didn't understand him. But after that film, I saw the pain behind his silence. I saw his shame. And I saw his strength. I stopped yelling. I started listening." Jeff paused. His voice didn't crack, but his eyes shimmered. He folded the letter gently, placed it on the desk between them. "That boy is a nurse now," he continued. "He wrote me again last year. Said he reads passages from my book, The Weight of Stillness, to his trauma patients. Said they don't always respond to medicine, but sometimes, to silence they do." A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A man just behind her gripped his chest, not from pain, but from recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from hearing something you've felt your whole life, but never put into words. And that Jeff said, sitting back, is why I do this. Not for applause, not for ratings, not for staying relevant. For connection, for meaning. For the one person, just one, who might feel seen because of it. He turned gently toward the crowd, no longer needing permission to speak. "We talk so much about success in this business, about opening weekends and review scores, but none of those numbers held me through chemo. None of them helped me breathe when I couldn't get out of bed. What did this letter? This reminder that art, when it's honest, has purpose." There was no music cue, no applause sign, but the energy in the room had completely transformed. People weren't just watching a celebrity. They were witnessing a human moment, a rare, unfiltered glimpse at what dignity, depth, and purpose really look like in a public setting. Jimmy Kimmel sat wordless. The man who began the segment with zingers and viral bait now found himself caught in something entirely different: respect, and maybe a little regret. Jeff looked at him not with resentment, but with a strange kindness. "So when you ask if I'm here to sell peace or just sell books," he smiled faintly, "I'm here because peace isn't sold. It's offered. Quietly. Steadily. Sometimes even in front of cameras." For the first time all evening, a few audience members clapped, not loud, not rowdy, just heartfelt. Then more hands followed. No cheering, no whistles, just applause that felt human. It wasn't for Jeff the actor. It was for Jeff the witness, for Jeff the mirror, for Jeff the reminder that behind every role, every mistake, every awkward moment we replay online, there's a person who carries weight the world will never see. And for just a moment, everyone in that studio saw it. For a full 10 seconds after Jeff Bridges finished reading the letter, Jimmy Kimmel didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't glance at the audience. He didn't reach for a joke to break the tension. He just sat there, staring down at his desk hints, still cue cards untouched. The host of Jimmy Kimmel. Live, the man known for quick wit and fast pivots suddenly looked unarmed. The silence lingered not because someone forgot to cue the band, but because everyone knew something had just shifted. Finally, Jimmy moved. He reached forward and slowly swept the stack of prepared questions, jokes, and viral punchlines to the side. The papers slid off the edge of the desk and scattered on the floor unnoticed. "I think I owe you," he began, then stopped, visibly working to steady his voice. "I think I owe you, and our audience, an apology. It wasn't a performance. There was no dramatic sake, no rehearsed contrition. Just a man sitting across from someone he tried to embarrass, realizing too late that he'd been handed not humiliation, but wisdom." "We've done a lot of segments like this," Jimmy continued, glancing briefly at the camera crew. "We call them setups. Get a laugh. Stir the pot. Make it trend. And usually they do." He looked back at Jeff, and this time he didn't look like a late-night host. He looked like a man remembering what decency was supposed to feel like. But I don't think I've ever felt smaller than I do right now. There was no clapping, no gasp, just a thick stillness, the kind that tells you a man isn't just apologizing, he's waking up. Jeff sat quietly, his expression unchanged. He didn't gloat. He didn't offer a quick, "It's all good." Instead, he simply leaned forward, resting one weathered hand gently on the desk. "Jimmy," he said. Soft but firm, we all get lost sometimes. He let the words breathe. "The question is, do we stop and look around, or do we keep pretending we're still on the right road?" And just like that, the studio, which had started as a stage for mockery, became a space for reckoning. There was a brief, unplanned rustling in the crowd. Then a few quiet claps, not for entertainment, but for truth. It wasn't the usual applause you hear when the cameras flash the clap now sign. It was slow, thoughtful, human, the kind of applause that says, "We needed to hear that." Jimmy nodded. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there, letting the moment land. You could almost feel the production crew behind the scenes, shifting in their chairs. Editors wondering if they'd even want to cut this down later, producers realizing the segment had become something no one could have scripted. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was the first step in a direction the show hadn't walked in years. "I came here tonight to talk about Stillness," Jeff said, turning once more toward the audience. "But I think we all ended up learning about something else too. The cost of noise." He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it like a grandfather telling a story that mattered. And the people listening weren't an audience anymore. They were witnesses, participants. Changed. In a world where most media moments vanish after 24 hours, this one felt eternal. And that's when something rare happened. Kimmel reached across the desk, not for a handshake, but for connection. Jeff reached back, met his hand halfway, and they locked eyes. It wasn't closure, it was a beginning. And the studio, trained for laughter, learned to listen. By the time Jeff Bridges and Jimmy Kimmel quietly shook hands across the desk, the on-air moment had ended, but something far greater had just begun. What started as a late-night segment meant to stir up laughs had transformed into a national and then international awakening. And the spark, a single moment of stillness captured by an unpaid intern with an iPhone. Unbeknownst to producers, one of the younger camera assistants, moved by what she was witnessing, had discreetly recorded portions of the unplanned exchange. No filters, no edits, just warm, honest truth. She uploaded a 90-second clip to TikTok at 11:03 p.m. Eastern. By 2 a.m., it had 500,000 views. By sunrise, it had passed 5 million. The hashtag was simple, hashtag Stillness Speaks. By mid-morning, our Stillness Speaks was the #1 trending topic on Twitter in the US and climbing globally. But this wasn't your typical viral moment filled with outrage or irony. This was something else entirely. People weren't just sharing the clip. They were reflecting on it, quoting it, crying over it, learning from it. "I haven't seen this kind of grace in years," one viewer tweeted. Jeff Bridges didn't just school Jimmy Kimmel, he gave a lesson to the whole country. Within 12 hours, the New York Times, BBC, and Fox News all ran headlines that for once weren't at odds with one another. The Bridges effect. How one moment of dignity redefined talk show culture. Editorials poured in. CNN called it a cultural recalibration. The Wall Street Journal ran a Sunday feature titled, "In the Age of Outrage, Stillness Wins." Meryl Streep reposted the clip with just 3 words: poise. Truth. Robert Downey Jr., never one to overstate online, captioned it. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the bar. Oprah, known for celebrating meaningful cultural turning points, simply wrote, "Jeff Bridges reminded us who we could be again." And this wasn't just a celebrity echo chamber. College campuses picked it up. At Columbia, media professors paused their syllabus to screen the full exchange. NYU's School of Journalism held a panel titled, "When the Mic Drops, but the Voice Still Stands." Students who weren't even alive during Bridges' early career now quoted him in essays on authenticity and leadership. One communications professor at Stanford coined a phrase that quickly took root. The Bridges effect isn't just what he said, it's what he refused to become. Clips from the original broadcast and the behind-the-scenes phone footage flooded YouTube. Within 4 hours, a combined 10 million views were logged across platforms. The comments weren't the usual internet snark. They were full of reflection, gratitude, and even confession. "I used to love Gotcha TV. Not anymore. That man changed something in me tonight. My father was a Vietnam vet. Quiet, strong, misunderstood. Jeff Bridges reminded me of him. I called him today after 10 years. The ripple effects didn't stop with audiences. Executives in major networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, Netflix, held emergency meetings to discuss their own late-night formats. Some shows quietly shelved segments that had relied on shock or shame. A few even reached out to Jeff's team to invite him as a guest, not for controversy, but for clarity. At UCLA, the journalism school officially added the Bridges-Kimmel moment into their ethics course under the unit Emotional Intelligence in Public Media. A slide in the new curriculum read, "Truth doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it only needs space." Ironically, Kimmel's own team, once eager to chase fast laughs, was now fielding interview requests from PBS and NAB, not about the joke, but about the shift. The irony was impossible to ignore. A man known for silence had spoken louder than the entire media machine, and the world had listened. 6 months passed. The world kept turning, headlines came and went, and television moved on, as it always does. But something about that night between Jeff Bridges and Jimmy Kimmel never faded. It didn't become old news. It became a benchmark. And then it happened again. Not a repeat, not a sequel, a return. The announcement was quiet. No splashy promo campaign, no celebrity teasers, or "don't miss this" slogans. Just a simple statement on Jimmy Kimmel's social media: Jeff Bridges returns. Not as a guest, as a friend. That was all it took. The studio audience that night didn't look like the usual talk show crowd. Yes, there were the young fans and regulars, but this time you saw veterans in baseball caps, retired teachers, mothers, and grandfathers. People who remembered the way television used to feel before it got so loud. The lights came up. The band stayed silent. No music played as Jimmy walked on stage. He didn't crack a joke. He didn't hold cue cards. Instead, he looked out at the crowd and said the words that marked a different kind of show. "We used to run for laughs. Now we aim for light." The audience didn't cheer. They nodded. The room wasn't charged with energy. It was grounded by intention. Then came Jeff Bridges. No intro music, no graphics, just a quiet walkout from stage right. A wave, a small smile. And, as he sat across from Jimmy once again, you could feel it. This wasn't a talk show. This was a full circle moment. Jimmy leaned forward, eyes steady. "I've been doing this show for over 20 years, he said. And that night changed everything, not just for the audience, for me. Jeff gave a humble nod, that same grounded grace still shining through. "Silence isn't absence," he replied gently. "It's presence without ego." The audience didn't need applause signs. They stood on their own. Slowly, quietly, every single person. No one clapped wildly. They just stood up for something rare, for something real. Even the crew cameramen, producers, editors, watching from the wings, stood too. Two men sat at a desk, but it wasn't television anymore. It was testimony, reflection, healing. The conversation didn't touch on ratings, promotions, or gossip. It wandered through Jeff's childhood, Jimmy's father, the weight of failure, the beauty of quiet resilience, and yes, stillness. Jeff spoke of his recovery, how the letters from viewers helped him through chemo. Jimmy shared how he started meditating after that night, how his son now watches The Fisher King with him and asks questions no talk show ever prepared him for. "You gave me a moment," Jimmy said near the end. "But more than that, you gave me a compass." Jeff smiled. "You gave yourself that, Jimmy. I just held the mirror." There was no standing ovation cue, but there it was again, the entire room rising to their feet. No light flashes, no music swell, just people, standing for presence. And as the camera zoomed out for the final shot, the screen didn't show credits or logos. It faded to black with a single sentence in white lettering. A moment of stillness. A legacy of presence. No one rushed to turn off the TV. No one grabbed their phones. For once in a long time, America just paused and remembered what it means to listen not just to words, but to truth. In a world filled with noise, sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't shout. Jeff Bridges reminded us that dignity isn't old-fashioned. It's enduring. When mocked on national television, he didn't defend himself with sarcasm or outrage. He chose stillness. He chose presence. And in doing so, he revealed a truth many of us already know deep down. Composure is not weakness. It's wisdom refined by time. For those of us in our later chapters, this story is more than entertainment. It's validation. We've seen decades of change, but one thing has never gone out of style: respect. We know what it means to listen before we speak, to lead without performing, and to stand firm without fanfare. Let this be a reminder that your story, your silence, your strength still speak volumes. You don't have to out-yell the world to change it. Sometimes your calm is the revolution. If this message speaks to your heart, subscribe for more stories that honor truth and grace. Share your thoughts in the comments. How has stillness shaped your life? And share this video with someone who still believes character matters.